Welcome to the Bowel Chronicles, where we dive deep into the world of bowel health. I'm your host, Nikki Kilpatrick, and on this podcast we have raw and candid conversations with individuals facing various bowel conditions and illnesses. Through personal stories and shared experiences, we illuminate resilience and courage in the face of adversity. Be reminded that each story is personal and unique. These conversations are not to be taken as medical advice or to replace guidance from a doctor or healthcare provider. Our aim is to inspire and empower through these amazing stories, amplifying voices often unheard. So join us as we embark on this journey together. Sit back, listen, and be inspired. Enjoy the episode. Well, hello guys, welcome back to another episode of the Bowel Chronicles. I'm your host, Nikki Kilpatrick, and today I'm joined by the lovely Summer Griffiths. Thank you, Summer, for taking time out of your day, coming along and sharing your story with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
Yeah, Summer, I've been following your journey, as I said there just before we hit record, for quite some time. You're definitely someone who appears on social media. You work with Pelican Respond as an ambassador, so you're definitely a face we all see on social media. And you definitely inspired me and encouraged me to what life was like or could be like having a stoma, and I guess gave me a little bit of hope. So thank you for turning up on social media and doing all that you do. But I really want to get to the nitty gritty details of your journey. You've been living with inflammatory bowel disease, ulcerative colitis. Why don't you kick off, Summer, and tell us, how did your diagnosis come about? What age were you? And what were your symptoms?
So I was 19 years old, and my first symptoms were having blood in my stool. And it was the first symptom that I noticed and was an immediate red flag. We lost my granddad to bowel cancer. So it was
Okay.
like a bit of a shock when I started having similar symptoms. So I went to see a GP, and I was actually misdiagnosed in the first instance with constipation, which anyone with inflammatory bowel disease will know that is not the case. I was definitely not constipated. And that was the only symptom I had. So I had a few stool samples later on
Mhm.
and was then told that it would either only be Crohn's or colitis due to the sort of really high inflammatory markers. So long story short, had about 6 months between the initial appointment and when I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis. Within that sort of period of time, I went to A&E about 3 or 4 different times because the pain I was experiencing in my stomach was just on a whole nother level. And it just got increasingly worse, and to the point where I wasn't going out or, couldn't leave the house because my symptoms were just really bad.
Mhm.
I then got diagnosed with ulcerative colitis in 2019. So yeah, still 19 at this point. And yeah, it just went from there really.
So your symptoms just started off then basically as bleeding whenever you passed a bowel motion.
Yeah.
But in less than a year, they got much exacerbated to the point where you were having to take yourself to the hospital.
Yeah, and I think before I didn't really know, and I think as females, you have stomach pains. It's overlooked and it's just thought, well, it's a period pain. So, you don't think any more of it. And, from when the symptoms started, it spiraled very quickly to being in sort of excruciating pain all the time. Anytime I had anything to eat, then, it caused loads of pain, it caused loads of blood in my stool. So I stopped eating because, why would you eat when it's going to cause you pain and uncomfort? I was actually told by a doctor in the hospital when I went into A&E one time that it didn't matter if I wasn't diagnosed or didn't have any treatment for my inflammatory bowel disease over a course of time, whether that be, 6 months, a year, because it wouldn't deteriorate and it wouldn't get worse. So at the time in my head, I'm thinking, okay, well, doctors know best. And, if I don't get seen and I don't get my diagnosis just yet, then it's fine, I can wait. But obviously, what was actually going on was the complete opposite. And I was getting really, really bad really quickly.
Yeah. Another case of someone being gaslit by professionals,
Yeah.
sadly.
Yeah,
And
unfortunately.
as your story goes, obviously you deteriorated, and we're going to talk about surgery and things.
Mm.
Other people who I've interviewed have maybe had ulcerative colitis going on for 10 years that they didn't know about. And obviously, the cell dysplasia, everything changes within the body if treatment isn't used.
Mm.
This does become really, really severe. So um, it just makes me so angry. And it makes me so angry when I see that you're only 24 years of age. One of my daughters is 24, and I'm just like, that's just not good enough. Yeah, I wouldn't settle. I would be very, very irate speaking to those professionals.
Yeah, and it's really tricky as well, isn't it? Because at the, if I knew that, if there's someone said that to me now, it'd be a very different story. But at the time, I had no idea what Crohn's and colitis even was. I didn't know anyone with a stoma bag. I didn't know anyone that had inflammatory bowel disease or anything like that. So you put your trust in the professionals, and unfortunately, it was a misplaced trust with that particular doctor.
Mhm. Okay. So I'm assuming that doctor got binned, or you didn't have to see that doctor again, and you seen someone else.
Well, luckily it was only an A&E consultant doctor. So yeah, my actual consultant that I had throughout my treatment was amazing. So I got very fortunate there.
Amazing. Good, good, good. So talk us through then your symptoms. What were all of your symptoms like?
So in a peak flare up, which to be honest was from when I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis until my surgery, didn't really have a massive respite period. I would be going to the toilet 30 times a day. Within that, I obviously had a lot of blood passing through. My weight would fluctuate massively because when I was in a flare, I would lose loads of weight. And then, sort of on the reverse, when I was back on the steroids, I would put some weight on. I had awful stomach pains just all of the time. And I would say they were probably my two main symptoms. And then I think because of the various medications, you get various different side effects and symptoms. But they were the two main ones for me.
So during this period, there wasn't really any respite before surgery.
So
Um,
I had probably about 4 months where I felt okay. I had my diagnosis. I went on to a course of steroids. Obviously had those for 8 weeks, felt great, came off them, and obviously it just started back up again. It never really went away with just steroids. So I tried my first round of immune suppressants, and they was basically as a result of me ended up in hospital because I was going to the toilet so often. I wasn't eating. I remember quite vividly actually, my mum actually had to almost carry me into hospital because I couldn't even walk. I was so unwell. And I think that's like one of the pinnacle moments that she remembers throughout the whole time as well, that I was so unwell and just really awful that I couldn't even walk into the hospital doors to get admitted. So I had the injections first of all. They never really worked. And I think I'd been on IV steroids, so coming off of those, it just started back up again. I then switched over to the IV immune suppressants, the infliximab. I had that for about a year, and that was over COVID. I would say that I got probably about 4 or 5 months where I felt great, and that was more towards the end of the course of the treatment. And then because it's a biological treatment, you only get a year's funding. So the funding stopped after a year, and I was told that that would be it, and I would have to wait and see how my body reacted before anything else was to continue. So very frustrating, but again, not much you can do. So left it. Obviously, almost immediately, my symptoms started back up again and they all came back. So I had to have some tests before they could start me up on the infliximab again. And by the time that they'd got around to doing that, I'd actually built up antibodies against the infliximab drug. So it was no longer going to work. And sort of before this, I had moved back from university. So I was in the middle of studying my degree. So it was a bit of a tricky time. So when I was trying all of this, it was sort of over a gap year of university to try and sort of recuperate and get my health back on track.
Yeah.
So I then went over to having the final biological treatment before my surgery, which was the injection. So I taught myself how to self-inject. I was told by medical professionals at this point that the chance of it working was about 20%. It was pretty low. And this was the then second time that they mentioned surgery as a possibility. And I was told that if this didn't work, there was really nothing left for me to try. And any biological treatment I would try later would have less than a 20%, chance of actually working. So I went onto this medication with very high hopes and basically convinced myself that it was working. And I think I'd got to the point where you live with the condition so long, it does become your new normal. So I was saying these are great, it's really working, it's really helping. And they said, right, we need to take you for a colonoscopy just to double check that it is working because your inflammatory markers are actually really high. So there's something not quite right here.
Okay.
Went for the colonoscopy, and I remember him saying to me, the doctor that done the colonoscopy, that he didn't know how I was still walking because the inflammation in my bowel was just on another level. But I felt great. And obviously I wasn't great, but I'd convinced myself that I was. Um, so at that point they said, there is no other options for you now, and the only option is to have stoma surgery.
Wow. And this was back in 2021.
Yeah, this is sort of end of 2020 going into 2021. And I worked it with my surgeon so that I would finish my second year at university and then have the stoma surgery as opposed to having to have it earlier, and sort of have to miss out on my second year again. So I wanted to get that one signed off, if you like, before I had the surgery.
Good job. Good job. Wow. So, like, whenever you were on that the infliximab for the second time, it just felt like, as you said, you become used to it. It was your new norm. Um, but your pain just wasn't the same level without the infliximab. So you were just accepting of, yeah, it must be working, and yeah.
Yeah, so I think because it wasn't infliximab the second time, it was the injection, but very similar form.
Yeah.
I think the pain was definitely there when I think back to it, and all of the signs, all of the red flags when you have IBD for a flare-up were there. Um, but again, I got into sort of a bad habit of, you know, not eating because if you don't eat, it doesn't hurt as much. So, maybe the pain was a bit less, but I wasn't really eating anything to, just kick anything off. And I think I just really, really, really did not want to have the stoma surgery. So in my head, if this worked, then, I can defy the odds. I can keep going with this and I can, put off what was the inevitable of having my stoma surgery.
Had you even researched them? Because stoma surgery had been talked about a few times. Had you began to research it and look into it in more detail? Or did you just...
So when I first came back from university, so this was probably in the 2020, they said that I needed to consider stoma surgery because how they measure, as well as, all of your inflammation markers and your colonoscopies, is your quality of life. And they said your quality of life right now is, very minimal because you've had to leave your degree, you've had to move home, and you've had to take a gap year. So they said about it then. And I did a bit of research and just said, absolutely not. I said, like, I'm 20. I'm not even turned 20 yet. I'm still like 19. I've only had this for about 6 months. Like, no way in hell you're going to remove my bowel and give me a stoma bag. That's what old people have. Like, that was my thought process. And then when it came round to, again, they were talking about stoma surgery seriously again, when I tried the 3 different biological treatments, I looked into it again, but to be honest, Nikki, I just felt really cheated. I felt really annoyed and upset with the system because they were only going to give me three options. I tried the three and it felt like they were giving up on me. In hindsight, there really, really wasn't anything else that they could have done. But at the time, I really struggled with that, which I think is why, I tried to tell myself that the medications were working. So it was only really after they said, this is your only option, we do it now and we plan it and you have a better success rate, or we leave it and your bowel will perforate and, we'll be doing it as an emergency. So either way, you're going to have it, but like, let's like realistically think about how it's going to work. So I think at that point is when I took it most seriously and was like, right, this is my only option. I need to start looking into it, a little bit more. But I had no idea that the whole, Instagram IBD stoma community even existed. And I think when I first started, finding out about it, it was through the leaflets and, the booklets and pamphlets you're giving by like the stoma nurses and the surgeons. And nobody looked like me on the booklets I was given. And when you Google it online, any of like the videos or any like, materials you're directed to didn't resonate with me at that point either.
They're an older generation, and I don't know, we just associate stomas with older people, and that's what happens whenever you get
Yeah.
to a certain age. Couldn't possibly happen to someone so young.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it wasn't until I actually, I don't know if you know, I think she's Eilish Diaries on Instagram now. But I actually spoke to her first of all through the Crohn's and Colitis Facebook forum because I was like, right, I'm having, this stoma surgery. I need to speak to like a girl my age who I can ask all these different questions about that, no one else is going to understand. And that is really the sort of my entryway into the whole stoma online community was through her. So yeah, it's pretty amazing.
I love that, and I hope Eilish, if she's listening,
Yeah,
not older, knows that and is
yeah,
aware of that, because just the power of one person sharing their story just connects someone else to like almost like a lifeline.
100%.
And we don't always realize, the impact that sharing our personal stories has on other people. So
Yeah,
that,
100%.
that is amazing. So you were able to find the IBD community and kind of get a little bit of hope and have more kind of peace around the idea of having a stoma surgery and
Yeah, definitely.
expand it. So when it came to the time then for you to have your stoma surgery, was it always to be an ileostomy or a colostomy? What type of stoma did you?
So I have an ileostomy stoma. It was a temporary stoma, and I was always given the option to have it reversed or to have it made permanent. When you say temporary stoma, it seems really silly because it is a permanent fixture in your life until it changes. So I think it's a yeah interesting choice of terminology there. But yeah, I had that and was given the option to change either way. I went into it knowing that it would be permanent. The research and people I spoke to that did have it reversed and had a J pouch was not something that I wanted to entertain. But yeah, I was given the option.
And I think, you don't want to entertain that because naturally with a J pouch, you do have runnier bowel motions. So why would you go from being on the toilet 30 times a day to all of a sudden having this stoma that you don't have to suffer the pain of sitting on the toilet 30
Mhm.
times a day, even 10 times a day?
Yeah,
And it's so much easier to empty a bag, to have that converted into a J pouch, to be back sitting on the toilet. Um,
yeah.
there are so many people that go through it and it works for them, which is amazing. Um, but you also hear the other side of it of people going back and saying, take my J pouch away and give me back my stoma.
Yeah, and I think I spoke to my surgeon about it, And I said, okay, so will my, this was obviously after my stoma surgery. I said, will my output still be the same then? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, well, my output is really liquidy. Like I've got an ileostomy. It's very temperamental. And, I currently don't control when it comes out. So I can control when I empty it and I can choose when that, works well for me. But then you're telling me I might potentially have to go to the toilet 10 times a day and it's still going to be the same like liquidy output. So I'm just going to be back to where I was when I had ulcerative colitis, as opposed to just having this stoma bag and choosing when I empty it.
Yeah, planning life around where's my nearest toilet. I need to know where it is because I might just have to go all of a sudden. Yeah.
Yeah.
Summer, what was it like whenever you went in then for your stoma surgery? You know, obviously you had to be accepting of it because you knew there was no other alternative.
Yeah.
But whenever you woke up, what was it like whenever, you first seen?
Yeah. So I had about 3 months to prepare. I had it in June 2021. So it was sort of finalized early 2021, and it was a week after my 21st birthday once I'd finished my second year of uni. My surgeon actually wanted to do it on the day of my 21st birthday, but I was like, please, can we just like move it back a week? Give me the day. So I think at that point I had come to accept it because ultimately there was no other option. And I thought, well, you know, the route I can go down here now is that I can sit here and feel sorry for myself and, ultimately go in, a very dark place, or I can accept it for what it is and try and make the best out of this. So I came to peace with it sort of pre the surgery. I had done so much research and knew everything there was to know about having a stoma, and I'd been and seen my stoma nurses many times, asked them, so many questions, but nothing quite prepares you for the feeling when you wake up for the first time with your stoma. I ended up in intensive care after my stoma surgery, and I think there was a few sort of complications during the actual surgery itself because it took a lot longer than initially it should have. Um, I remember waking up and being in so much pain and just thinking, what on earth have I done? I've never had surgery before. I'd never sort of done anything like that before. The colitis was the first experience of, many for me. And I thought, honestly, there is no way to describe the pain and the feeling when you wake up. I think because you have such a high pain threshold from the ulcerative colitis, the Crohn's, you think it's going to be okay, but nothing prepares you for that. And I remember sort of looking at it for the first time, and my stomach was all swollen, and there was scars all over, and it was really bloated, and like my stoma was really big because obviously it's really swollen, isn't it? And you just sort of think, right, okay, this is a lot. Um, and to be honest, I think the first week I was in hospital, I was too unwell to really properly register what actually happened. The surgery really didn't agree with me. I think where obviously, they do move all your organs around, I was like violently sick for a lot of it. My pain wasn't very well controlled. It was a major learning curve in regards to the stoma itself, advocating for myself, because this was not long after COVID. So visitors weren't actually allowed in hospital at this point. I was very lucky that my mum and dad were allowed into intensive care because the nurses on shift were really great. But as soon as I was moved out of ICU, I wasn't allowed anyone. Um, and it's a lot to have to deal with. 21, this is a whole new experience, and you're sort of navigating it by yourself because no one else is there to help.
How were your stoma nurses?
Brilliant. To be fair, they are absolutely amazing. I know that some people have mixed reviews, but I love all three of my stoma nurses, and they're the most helpful, incredible women. They're like my aunties that are just like so friendly, so helpful. And like that week in hospital were like such a support for me. Um, like I remember one day I had been violently sick sort of all day and couldn't keep anything down, and one of the stoma nurses was coming in to help me change my stoma bag because obviously one of the things you need before you go home is to tick that off. She came in and was like, "You're definitely in no state to be learning how to do this today." But instead of just like, moving on, she sat with me for like half an hour, making sure I was okay. She went and spoke to some of the nurses to get me some more pain medication and, really went above and beyond for me.
I love that. I
Yeah.
think stoma nurses just aren't a basic nurse, shouldn't even say that, a basic nurse. They're
Yeah.
not just a nurse.
Yeah.
They are someone who is so empathetic with what they're dealing with.
Yeah.
I know we have a team of about eight, and every single one of those nurses are fabulous.
Yeah.
Very attentive, great at what they do. They do go above and beyond
Yeah.
their call of duty, definitely.
Yeah.
Great. What was life that like then on the other side of stoma surgery, getting out, going through recovery? Obviously you have the pain of surgery at first, but when you get past that,
Mm.
was the IBD pain gone?
So the recovery was interesting. I mean, the pain, the severe pain from surgery, I think subsided very quickly. I would probably say about a week, or I would probably say about 2 weeks in, I was just taking, paracetamol for the pain. It wasn't anything like it was in the few days that followed the surgery. I think my recovery for my body took a little bit longer because I was still on steroids right up until the day of my surgery because my colitis was just so out of control that there was no way that I couldn't be on that. So, and obviously steroids are, known for taking the healing process to, it takes a little bit longer. So the recovery was hard, but each sort of passing day I did get better and I managed my stoma better. And, I didn't realize how unwell I had been before until after, which was like, a big sort of, epiphany to me that I was like, wow, okay, I really was unwell if this is what, it's supposed to be like. But I would probably say about 2 weeks after my surgery, my colitis flared up again because my rectum that had been left behind immediately flared up. And to be honest with you, I didn't realize that that was like even a possibility because they said that, once you haven't got food passing through, it should hopefully just be like stable and you should be fine. And then my symptoms started to come back, and I started to have, blood and mucus passing from the remaining part of the rectum. And I remember I texted Ali at the time and was like, "Oh my God, like something's gone like really wrong here. Like, what is this?" And she was like, "No, like that's just your rectum, and it's, it's inflamed again. Like your colitis is back." And I was just like, it was just like, it's almost like double-edged sword, isn't it? You're getting better, but then the colitis is still there. And I think at that point it just solidified how like extreme my colitis was and how like, how bad it was that even after all of that, it was still back. And then I had to go back in to see the surgeons and like my IBD team. And they basically wanted to remove it as soon as possible. And they wanted to do the Barbie Butt surgery 6 months after my first stoma surgery because you obviously have to give your body 6 months to heal. And they didn't want to leave it any longer because of the complications that can occur from leaving the rectum with IBD untreated. But at this point, I just started my third and final year of my degree. So again, it was like another sort of back and forth game of when we're going to do the Barbie butt surgery.
And so what was the plan then?
So the plan was,
To finish the degree
yeah,
or?
So I told them the plan was to finish my degree. I said, look, I've got this far. I've had all of these obstacles and I'm like so close to the end to getting my degree. Like, I can't afford to take another year. Like, you're just going to have to, I said, we'll have to do it in a way that allows me to finish my degree, but obviously not ignoring my health. So it's decided to do it in the May. My university degree wasn't supposed to finish until the July, but I done all of my exams early. I finished and wrote my dissertation early and submitted it so that I could finish it like a few months ahead of everyone else and go for my Barbie Butt surgery in the May. So it was sort of like meet in the middle.
And this, Barbie butt surgery, which we'll talk about,
Mm.
isn't just as straightforward as having your lip ileostomy stoma done. This is major and major recovery,
Mm. Yeah.
a young female.
Yeah, I think they obviously left my rectum in place initially because obviously I'm a young female, as you mentioned, haven't got children, and no sort of immediate plans to do that either. So they like to leave it as long as possible because obviously it can cause like scar tissue around it's your like uterus and womb and things. So, but ultimately there wasn't, again, didn't really have an option in it because it had to go. So yeah, it was
What was your thoughts around that? Because, obviously doing the full Barbie butt surgery, they like to say if you're going to try for a baby, could you try soon? But there are ways and means around everything, like
yeah,
delivery section and
I
things.
think, had it been in a different place in my life, it'd been very different. But at the time, it was ultimately I come first and my health comes first. And I need to get this under control before I even think about doing anything like that. So, you know, and also being at this point, still 21, hadn't even turned 22 yet. I hadn't really lived my life yet because I'd been, bedbound almost, since my diagnosis with ulcerative colitis. I'd lived like a very sheltered life because I was very limited to what I could do. So in my head, if this meant that, it might be something that I have to sacrifice or, it's across that bridge when you come to it problem for me. And I wanted to completely get rid of the ulcerative colitis and remove that part of my life so that I could move on and, maybe get to that point later down the line. But it was never really a consideration because, I just wanted to be healthy and, get a chance to live my life.
So Barbie butt surgery, you had that done, and how did you fare with that? What was the recovery like?
Yeah, so the surgery itself, I mean, I really struggled going into that surgery because I knew what was on waiting for me on the other side. So I think this with the stoma surgery, ignorance is bliss, had no idea what was coming. But about surgery, I knew, and I knew it was going to be 10 times worse.
Yeah.
So, before actually going down to the surgery, I had like a panic attack, and it was a really awful day to like have the surgery because it is really scary when you know what's coming. Um, and then my pain was managed better because my surgeon and like my whole sort of medical team had various like consultations and meetings about how it's going to be managed better because from my stoma surgery my pain wasn't really managed. I was given oral tablets, which I was telling all of the nurses that it wasn't working, and no one believed me and thought, I just wanted more pain meds. And actually, when the tablets came a hole in my stoma, then it was at by that point, though, it's too late, really. So I said, before we're going into this, there needs to be like a plan. So I had an epidural, which was great. And I remember waking up from the bypass surgery and was like, oh my God, I can't feel a thing. Like, you know, this is so easy. Like, this is great. Um, Obviously, once the epidural wore off, then, that wasn't the case. But It's hard because I healed faster because I wasn't on as high dosage of steroids before, and I had like a plan to come off the steroids a few weeks before the surgery, so that definitely helped. Um, but the actual surgery itself is obviously a lot more complicated. I know it's done in very different ways. So for me, the wound wasn't packed. Each sort of individual layer was sewn up. So I did have like a closed wound. But I know obviously some people it's like an open wound and it's packed. So I think that definitely helped because once it was all sewed up, it was healing. I think I did end up having to go back to see my surgeon pretty much every day or every other day after when I left home because it wasn't fully healing. But then over time it did. I think the thing I struggled the most, it sounds really silly, but just like sitting down. Like you don't realize how much you can't do when you can't even sit. Like you're laying constantly between, one side to the next, but you've just had surgery as well. So your stomach, they've just cut into you again. Like your stomach's still really sore. Your bile butt wound is still really sore. You can't ever really get comfortable. So you don't really sleep very well. You can't really go out and doing anything, even if you're feeling better because you can't sit down really. Um, so it was really hard, but I think I was quite lucky that my wound healed quite nicely. Like once it did start to heal, it was fine. So I know a lot of people have issues with how well it does heal.
Did they refashion your stoma from the lip, or did they just leave it?
No, completely left my stoma. It wasn't causing me any issues, so it was left, and they sort of I had what do you call it? The microscopic surgery, so just a few little incisions, and then they obviously had the large incision on my bum where they obviously removed the remaining bit of the rectum.
Amazing. That's good because I know for some people they refashion the stoma and make it a permanent end, but I have been talking to a few people where they just go in behind the lip and just snip it and staple it up and it heals that way. So
Yeah,
that's always
yeah.
good where you're not like marked for a second time with a new stoma. Um, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that was one thing that I did speak to my surgeon about before was because I know obviously depending on how much of your bowel you have removed and what is removed, when obviously they did my stoma surgery, the stone was placed there, and obviously my rectum obviously what was left, was stapled up and it was almost like a closed unit. So when they did come around to do the Barbie butt, they didn't need to touch my stoma and they could just remove the rectum. So I'm quite glad I didn't have to go through that because it would have felt like having two surgeries as opposed to just the one.
Good, good. Amazing. Did you have to, was your diet any different this time? Because obviously when you have your stoma surgery, the first time you're on low residue for 68 weeks, were you able to eat normal foods again straight after your Barbie butt surgery, or did you go on to low residue?
So I never really had like a set diet per se. I think when I first had the stoma, there was foods that I was told to avoid, which I did, and then my diet was the same throughout, just from then on. And I've sort of gradually like introduced different things back into my diet to see, how it fares with my stoma. But I didn't, once I had my bariatric surgery, I didn't have to follow like a different diet or anything. It just was as I was before.
Okay. And then overall, your recovery from Barbie butt surgery, how long do you reckon it took you to heal to be back to normal, sitting comfortably and able to go out and do exercise like you love Pilates and go to the gym?
Yeah. So I would probably say I had the surgery May, and by the July, I'd started a job and was in the office and was
Wow.
sitting down. So 2 months. So I would say it was quick, but once it started to heal, it was very quick, if that makes sense. So I would probably say like 2 to 3 months for it to fully heal.
Okay. And what about the fatigue? Did you have a lot of fatigue then? Or, if you did, is it still ongoing?
I think for me, the I wouldn't say that I struggle with it now. I think, you know, as any ostomate will contest to, if you don't eat or you don't stay hydrated, it's worse. But I think I was really fatigued when I had my colitis and when I was in a flare. So actually, when all that was removed and stripped back, it was manageable. And I've always suffered with like a B12 deficiency, and I've always been a little bit anemic and things like that. So for me, it's more manageable now as opposed to like in like a peak flare. I would say I've struggled a lot more.
Okay. So once they remove the rectum and the large bowel, Barbie Butt surgery's done, you've recovered. Is there this moment of like, oh my God, this is what my normal should have been like?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think I I just cracked on with life. I just, it wasn't like an immediate thing that hit me. It was just when I looked back and was like, that was an absolutely crazy few years that like no one in my circle has been through or knows what it's like. And I've done all of that and come out on the other side. And this is actually what it's supposed to be like. And you are supposed to, be able to go out shopping with your friends and go for dinner and drinks and go on holiday. And you're supposed to be able to do all of that. And it was like taking a step back to realize that that's what it should be like. And I wasn't living when I had my colitis. I was like barely surviving and just like getting through the day. And yeah, it was like a complete, oh my God, like I'm not in hospital every day. I don't have to worry about appointments or medication. Like, you know, it's just all it's just all gone, isn't it? Like it's crazy.
Like this new freedom of being independent of a hospital and just cracking on with life.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And it's I mean, even now I don't like going back to the hospital. I have very bad memories, not from anything in particular, just from that time in my life. So I really don't enjoy going back. But I remember when I received my sort of official discharge letter from the surgeon, I was like, oh my God, like that's it. And I got really emotional because I was like, all of this time, it's not even been that long. It's only been like 3 or 4 years, but this whole time it's been like a constant battle of wills trying to get medications and treatments and trying to find out what works for me and, make myself better. But it's done now. Like, I'm fully at the point now where I'm okay. I've been discharged. Like it was huge.
And like, is there anything, you could say to your younger self, because before, whenever you were on the biologic treatment and, there was no other option but to have stoma surgery and you felt like the system had failed you, is there anything you could say to your younger self now, looking back on that, because you
Yeah.
ultimately were like, I'm not having stoma surgery, like I'm not having that. And
Yeah.
here you are excelling at life on the other side of it.
I would say stomas aren't that bad. Like it's so simple, but so true. Stomas aren't that bad. You're actually gonna, experience a great life after that. And a lot of it is gonna be attributed to your stoma because I've done things because of my stoma that I would never have dreamed of doing before. I would have considered myself a very private person to then go from that to posting, photos of my stoma, online and going to do photo shoots with, different brands and, trying to raise, the word about stomas is crazy. So, stomas aren't bad and your life is going to be a billion times better than what it is now.
And your life definitely has. As I said, you're partnering with Pelican and Respond. You're the face of magazines, adverts. There, you exposing your body with your stoma and just being an amazing advocate and ambassador for the IBD and stoma community. It's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, and just something I never would have even dreamed of doing before.
Yeah. Wow. I was talking to someone recently and they just said there's something that's special, when you have this like almost like near death experience of I'm literally just existing right now. And then life completely turns around after having stoma surgery. It's just
Yeah.
really. eye opener moment, I think, where we just go, right, I'm going to say yes to everything.
And 100% it is. And you're so invested in the time that you're in, I think. And when you have colitis or Crohn's or whatever it is that you are sort of dealing with, you don't realize how bad it is because that's your life, that is your normal, that is what you're living. And probably people on the outside can see that, and people can see that, you've withdrawn and you're not doing what you normally do, or, you're having to make adjustments to your day-to-day life. Like, you can't see that in the moment. It's only when you come out the other side that actually you're like, wow, this is a crazy life that I'm leading just because of my stoma.
I will say at this point, if you're wanting to engage with Summer, see her content, you will find her on Instagram as Summer Stoma. Her Instagram handle will be tagged below in the show notes, so do go over, give her a follow. If there's anything that we haven't discussed or any questions you have, I'm sure you can pop somewhere a message or myself, and we will definitely get you the answers. But remember, folks, we are not professionals. We're just sharing our own opinions and our own experiences here. If you have any symptoms going on or you're not sure about, go and seek professional help from a doctor, a GP, consultant surgeon, and they will be in a position to advise you on that. Summer, is there anything else that you want to share today, you want to touch on before we wrap up?
Just to say that if you are in a position, like I was in before my stoma surgery, and you are worried or concerned about what your life is going to be like before, you can look at probably any ostomate Instagram and just see that your life is going to be amazing. And don't get me wrong, there will be ups and downs. You'll have a bag leak, you'll have a bad day, you'll think, why did this happen to me? But I would say 99% of the time, it's just going to be amazing. And don't be scared, embrace the change. And there are so many people that will be there to support you along the way.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Summer. Keep doing what you're doing. You're inspiring so many. I'm just one person, but as we've already touched there, you connecting with Eilish and the power of her story, the impact it's had on you. It just has the ripple effect, the domino effect of reaching more and more. So keep doing what you're doing. I love it, and I can't wait just to follow you on the rest of your journey. Thank you
Thank
so much for
you.
taking the time out of your day to come on and just share the real nitty gritty details that we appreciate, and your story will just inspire one more person at a time. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
Guys, that's it from Summer and myself today. It'll be over and out. Do come back and join us next week for another episode. But until then, goodbye.